you all were hand selected. Dani, I looked at your work online and I was just in awe. I think you're incredible. Jen, you know that I stan you from class. You probably think I'm such a creep at this point because I'm always like, yay, about your work. And Michelle, I'm lucky to call you a friend and someone that I look up to a lot. And I think we're going to have a very fruitful conversation. Oh, is my voice very low? If I talk much louder, is that better? Can you hear me better? Yeah? Okay.
It's a little bit better.
Okay. I might have to turn off my camera so that I can... Okay, I'm gonna have to turn off my camera so I can get very close to the computer. Is it much better now? Or is it still pretty quiet?
Yeah, it's much better now.
Okay. So basically what I was saying is that you all were hand selected. I'm like a big fan of all of you and all of your work. Dani, I saw your work online through research and I was in awe. I think you're incredible. Jen, I was saying that you probably think I'm such a creep because I'm always, standing your work in class. Michelle, I'm very lucky to be able to call you a friend and you're someone that I look up to a lot. So I think that we're going to have a very fruitful conversation. I also think it's interesting because you all are at different levels in your academic journey and you all identify with activism in different ways. So yeah, I think that we're going to have a very nice and interesting conversation. So to start off, I thought it'd be nice if you all could introduce yourselves. And tell us a little bit about causes. We could start with Dani.
Kwe kakina, kamera gwajababara makwe Indigenous-youth. Neashing Ming Minwa Taganik Donjaba, Mamawan and Anishinaabekwe King Donjaba, Treaty 4 and Donji, Nagiging Dodam. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dani. I was born and raised on Algonquin territory in what's colonially referred to as Ottawa. Originally I come from Chippewas of Nawash, which is about 3.5 hours northwest, I think, of Toronto, on the Georgian Bay, Bruce Peninsula area. On my dad's side, we're from Western Quebec. Algonquin's a barrier lake. Currently, I live on Treaty 4 land in Regina, Saskatchewan. I'm a second year, I think, student at the University of Ottawa doing a double major in history and Indigenous studies. But I'm currently making the transfer to First Nations University and the University of Regina to continue that work. Yeah, a lot of my work in community has been around the land back movement and Indigenous sovereignty. It all started with the Idle No More movement when I was 15, I think, in 2012. So yeah, a lot of my work has been around Indigenous sovereignty and the land back movement. So thank you much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dani. And if we could move to Michelle.
Did you say me?
Yes. Am I still
Okay.
super quiet?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I'll turn my volume up. Thank you for having me. My name is Michelle Molubi Johnson. Identify as a Black queer feminine woman. And I was born and raised in Windsor, Ontario, but now I currently live in Toronto. I am actually completing my master's in the humanities program right along with Jalissa. I have an undergraduate degree in humanities and another undergraduate degree in kinesiology. Right now, I'm currently also working for the City of Toronto's Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit as a community development worker. And a lot of my activism work is rooted in challenging anti-Black racism in different spheres. And that's that's what led me really to also working with Maggie's Toronto Sex Worker Action Project, where I'm a board member and a treasurer. And I really fell into that space because as a as being privileged enough to say that I'm, a loud and proud former sex worker, that I wanted to challenge the anti-Black racism that's inherent within the sex working community. But that kind of led me to working to challenging anti-Black racism within the larger structures of our society, particularly at the municipal level.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Oop. Are you able to hear me better now?
Yes, that's much better.
Or is it still pretty quiet?
That's much better.
Okay, great. I'm doing something weird with my phone right now, so I'm on 2 devices. So hopefully this will work. So if we could move on to Jen. Great.
Hey, hi everyone. First off, I would like to say thank you to the organizers and CERLAC for inviting me. I'm very, very excited to converse with my fellow panelists and everyone in attendance. My name is Jen Kaczynga. I use they, them pronouns. I am an artist, a writer, cultural worker, and researcher based in Toronto, Toronto. I'm currently wrapping up my first year in the Gender Feminist Women's Studies PhD program at York. And I'm passionate broadly around self-determination, liberation, and autonomy, and specifically focusing on causes related to, but not limited to, trans and quotes queer liberation, disability justice, and environmental justice. And I'm really looking forward to learning and exchanging with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. So for the first question, I thought it would be nice because at least 2 of you got whiplash from me identifying you as activists. So I thought it would be nice to talk about your journeys. I know, Michelle, you grew up in an activist environment. Could you tell us more about your activism journey and that environment growing up?
Thank you. Yes, I was one of the ones who did get whiplash from from this entire invite, because I never really imagined myself as an activist in the traditional sense of the word. But you're right, I did grow up in an activist household surrounded by activists. Both my parents were South African freedom fighters against the apartheid. So and all of the people that I call aunt and uncle, all of them were comrades of theirs who were also freedom fighters. And my mom was only 17 when she left her home in South Africa in 1976 to become a freedom fighter and to fight against the apartheid. And both my parents were a part of the Soweto uprising on June 16th, 1976 as teenagers, high school students who were met with police gunfire, fighting for their liberation. So activism has always been a topic in the house. Radical activism has always been such a topic in my house. And I just felt obligated that I had to continue the work, because as much as they've made a difference, the work is not done. And they have made such an impact that I can't let all of their actions and all of their work just fall into history. We have to continue this work going forward. So in whatever capacity that looks like. And I may not be be the same as my mother, because my mother is very radical, where I stand on the front lines the way she did, but I do want to, in a very much like a heavy capacity, be able to advance work and advance the care of our community.
Amazing, thank you so much. And I think we're going to get into this conversation a little bit more about rethinking what activism looks like. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that nice groundwork. Dani?
Yeah, I think for me, I started seeing it with my parents as a little kid. Both my parents were very active in the community, and like in the Ottawa Indigenous community, I was the baby being passed around at powwows and community events. And my dad says that I was the kid under the boardroom table at the Friendship Center. And I grew up very aware of who my community was. And that's something I'm really grateful for. But they were the ones who started saying oh, we should go to this vigil on Parliament Hill together, or letting me skip class to go to I Don't Know More rallies. And it started transitioning from my parents being the ones at community events to me being the one at community events. And so as I've mentioned a couple of times, that I Don't Know More was my start to, or like kind of my gateway into activism. I think I went to my first protest when I was 12 or 13 with my school, actually, and it was for Shannon's Dream, which is an initiative to get adequate schools on all First Nations reserves in Canada. And I remember being so shocked that there weren't proper schools, because in my mom's community where I had grown up going, we had one. And I was like, oh, so not everyone has that. And that's when I started really recognizing like the privilege I hold as, you know, a Native who grew up in the city. But yeah, once I Don't Know More started, my parents were like, we've lost her to protesting. Yeah, so that was about 10 years ago now. And since then I've started working with like causes for Wet'suwet'en out in BC, MMIW, G2S, just a bunch of Indigenous causes that I found were really close to home and really important to me.
That's amazing. You were literally born into activism. And Jen, how about you?
Yes. Yeah. So I was the other one who was also kind of grappling with being identified as an activist, and I think this is a really interesting question because of the fraught relationship I have with the term. Because, you know, who is named an activist, who self-identifies as one, and why? And so when I think about it in my own journey and through my ongoing reflections, I can kind of delineate where I considered myself an activist and where others started considering myself as an activist. And I think back to how it started. I was very young, like I was a youth activist who was primarily concerned with like international and local community development and gender issues. And I worked for, you know, Free the Children, Plan Canada, the Toronto District School Board, and other entities. And over time, I transitioned out of those spaces and moved into more action-oriented or community-based research as a tool for freedom, and or so I thought. And maybe we can come back to that at another point in time. But it was when I started taking research a bit more seriously that other people started calling me an activist. And it was and is still uncomfortable, not only because of the expectations I think that title assumes, but also with the performance of activism that I'm still like kind of grappling with. But I think about, yeah, just reflecting about how I was raised even across time, space, and place. And I've always been raised by like loud, quotes, you know, rude, marginalized genders who have always taught me that if something is wrong, you do and you say something, because all we have is we, right? All we have is each other. So I think it's that ethics of care for myself and for others that's provided a space for me to sort of reflect about my role within these spaces and push back against like the individualism I find in those spaces, and to understand and practice love, care, and patience. But I think, yeah, it was definitely my loved ones who kind of encouraged and guided me through thinking about activism in a more critical and ethical way. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, trying to make sense of it all, trying to figure out like where I fit and where I don't fit. And where sort of my making and my writing and culture work kind of converge and diverge, and what sort of possibilities can be ignited within and outside of those spaces. So I think that's, yeah, I think it's a challenge, but this is, yeah, I think this is the struggle with activism, I think, that I'm having now.
Absolutely. And going off of what you just said, I think that's a great segue into the next question that I had, because, you know, activism looks different for different people. And, you know, your methods, you said, has changed over time, or what activism looks like for you has changed over time. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about your journey on that transition and what your activism looks like now, and kind of how you, how you decided on your current methods, basically.
And you like for me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
This is a great question. I think all of this discussion just in general, I think prompted so many thoughts and reflections that I think is so necessary. But I think, as I just said, I'm still trying to figure out like what all of this is. I think as I'm shifting into more specific causes, like before I was more general causes. But I think with specificity comes opportunities to think creatively and critically about how to mobilize and translate knowledge, especially being in the spaces that I'm in. I think for now, I'm mobilizing particularly through like social media, my writing and my own art and community art facilitation and teaching. But I think when I hope when I gain greater capacity, I'll be looking to connect with some folks in the various communities that I'm in to kind of think through documentation, but also political education and community arts facilitation and teaching. And I'm hoping that I can learn from my panelists as well in terms of the type of work that they're doing as well. And then thinking about like methods and transitioning, I think those methods chose me. Like I feel like I didn't really set out to do this work, like it was a happy accident. And I think I've been being able to connect with so many different people, I think has really allowed for connections to be fostered and to mushroom into other opportunities that have opened other portals. But yeah, I think I'm just really curious and interested in like, I think maybe just engaging in more intimate work. And yeah, just thinking about like what work can be done with the capacities that I have at this point in time. Because I think, especially with the pandemic, my capacities have significantly shifted. And so has like, quotes, the activist current moment, just trying to figure out like, what does that look like? What does that look like when my body doesn't move in the ways that it used to? And how does that affect the other work that I'm doing? So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, just thinking and reflecting and learning.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Dani, you spoke about your methods, in the previous questions, but I was wondering if maybe you could talk about, what solidified that for you, or if it's ever wavered at all.
Yeah, I think for me, like being in person was something that I loved, like sharing space with different people. And that started to change when I think I realized how much we were being surveilled. Like definitely during the Wet'suwet'en actions in Ottawa, there are photos of like, yeah, just a lot of surveillance without like getting too much into it and potentially triggering folks. Yeah, it was really scary. And so we had to move to like really, I guess secretive would be the word for it, like secretive planning and, making sure that we were only discussing things through apps like Signal. And during the pandemic, I think it got even more difficult because, I'm immunocompromised, so is my whole family. And there's risk that I was willing to put myself in, like going to actions and organizing before the pandemic, but then it turned into a matter of I could bring COVID home to my family. And so it started becoming more online. We did a few actions in person, and I think the one that I'm proudest of to have helped with is the Moose Moratorium in La Vérendrye Park on my dad's territory, where we essentially, there were blockades set up to ensure that the moose population wasn't being hunted, because the population has gotten a lot lower in the past few years and the government refuses to do anything about it. Or refuse. There's talks happening right now, but yeah, like I think in person is like for me the best way, but yeah, I've also been able to do a lot of work with the organization that I work for now, which is the 4 Hours Youth Movement. And so for us, a lot of that looks like radical care and ensuring that like our community members are taken care of, our elders are taken care of, you know, helping if someone in our community has COVID and like, how can we get groceries to you? How can we make sure that like your family feels safe and that you have proper PPE? Yeah, that's what I can think of right now. But yeah, a lot of online work and like long hours on Zoom.
For sure. It's definitely a big pivot with the pandemic that has happened. And I know, Michelle, you do work in digital spaces. I was wondering if you academic work in digital spaces. I was wondering if you've observed, you know, since the pandemic, if there's been like a big difference in that, similarly to how Dani has said, like, has there been, you know, more of a presence online? Because I know, you know, Black Lives Matter started as a hashtag. Have you seen like any kind of shifts in your work?
I feel like we've all seen the shift to digital activism in so many ways. Even before the pandemic happened, there was a significant shift to digital activism because it really allowed for accessibility for a lot more people to be involved. I mean, it also kind of led to slacktivism, you know, the people who will just post something and they're not really invested. They just want the clout, they just want the attention. But it did allow a lot of people who before wouldn't really know how to support a movement or really wouldn't have the capacity to be in person at a movement, get involved in even just spreading awareness or even just learning about things that are going on in the world, which if we don't do anything at all, at least if we raise awareness and we allow people to know, to understand what is going on in the world. And during the pandemic, that obviously upscaled because our communication now has to be online. The ways in which we connect have to be online. So I've definitely noticed that shift. I absolutely noticed that shift to online spaces. And that's really kind of what drives my academic work, is understanding how we can take advantage of that shift to online activism, and how that can start to now not just be about bearing witness or about spreading news, but how do we really harness that scalability of particularly social media to now achieve policy change and to achieve practical and tangible results for our communities that are more than just a hashtag online.
Absolutely. No, and I think that you raise a great point with slacktivism. Love the phrase. I know, Jen, in some of our classes, this has kind of been brought up in different terms, but I just wanted to know what the three of you think about, you know, how this has become kind of like practice for people. You know, one thing that I think about is, I don't know if anybody's how invested on Instagram people are, but, you know, after the incident with George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, when people were putting black squares up on their feeds. So I was wondering what y'all think about how this can be combated, you know, how we can ensure that people are actually engaging with, you know, the causes that they're promoting. And also, if you know, or if you have any theories as to why why this is coming up. And this is just to anybody who may have an answer.
I was really waiting for somebody else to go because I just went. So I invite my other two panelists. I mean,
it's okay if you don't know. It's a tough question for sure.
No, it's a tough question. I don't know, Michelle, if you have anything to say. I'm just saying that I'm thinking about it because this is something that we have been thinking about in class, but also I've been thinking about it outside of class as well. And it's something that I still am like, I don't know what to do. And I think it just, for me, maybe this is my answer, is that it requires ongoing reflections and, maybe making mistakes and doing things wrong and just trying, and, maybe that's the way. But yeah, it's a hard question, but it's an important question.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree that it's a hard question. And I don't know if there's ever going to be a right or wrong answer. I feel like Jen said, we're just gonna have to try things, and some things may work for some instances while they don't work for others. The way I would I particularly want to kind of tackle it is really getting more behind the scenes and having a better understanding of what we're doing when we go online, and that means how our messages reach other people, and even really understanding such things as how algorithms work, so that we can learn how to curate messages that we want people to see, because we need to understand how those kind of mechanisms work if we want to mitigate the spread of misinformation, or like you said, the black squares that were populating and really just hiding the message, because they did nothing but just take up news feeds and hide the message. So but if we, if those of us who are really trying to do this work online had a better understanding of what those things mean, even in the technical sense, even if it's just the bare surface, then I feel like we'd be better equipped to kind of tackle those kind of situations and take advantage of the tools. We're not going to really be able to take advantage of the tools unless we understand how to use them. And a lot of that knowledge is very much held by gatekeepers, big tech and Silicon Valley. But we do have the capacity to at least understand how to take advantage of it. And that's kind of the angle that I would like to see us attack it from.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dani, I know you said that you made the shift of using Signal in communication due to surveillance. I was wondering if online spaces has made any other kind of, shift that you had to make due to surveillance or any other reason. I know that, digital spaces can kind of be like a blessing and a curse for this reason. Any other kinds of shifts?
Yeah, it's mainly been Signal, using that as a way to communicate. I know one of my chosen family members has been on the front lines at Get 'em Done for the Wet'suwet'en Nation for, oh my God, months now. And he was like, yeah, it's not safe for us to even message about random conversation things on Instagram. He's like, I have to use Signal now. I was like, okay, that's how serious it's getting. Yeah, I don't know. I think because so much is online, we're selective about what we're connecting our names to, and also using our legal names online. I don't know, on Facebook, I use my Algonquin name, and that's both in reclamation and in wanting some privacy. But I do have very public accounts, and I'm just very cautious. And my dad will be like, hey, maybe watch what you're saying, because you never know who's watching. It's also very weird when I moved to Saskatchewan about a year ago, and we ended up moving down the street from the RCMP headquarters here. So I thought that that was kind of funny, but also like, ooh,
Wow.
they're pretty close.
Yeah.
But
Goodness.
yeah, not, I wouldn't say that it's been too much more of a shift since we've moved online.
Okay, that's very good to hear. I'm glad that, you know, it hasn't been too much of a hindrance and you've found a way to navigate. Because, you know, actually, Michelle, I think our prof is in here from our digital cultures class. Hi, Marcus. You know, and it's something that we talk about a lot with privacy online. And, you know, I think actually we're in the weeks of activism currently. So it's something that we were talking about a lot. So it's nice to know that these conversations are being had and that people are, you know, figuring out ways to navigate and to protect themselves while doing this community care. So speaking of class, making a little shift, each of you are students from various backgrounds and academic levels. I was wondering if, you know, there's any way that your academic theory has informed your practice at all. So I'll start with Jen.
Yes. It's funny because I think baby Jen would be shook at how much I'm informed by academic theory. I think when I first started my master's, I remember telling my research supervisor at the time, I was like, I hate theory, and I felt like it wasn't reflected in my own life. But my goodness, when I was exposed to Black African feminisms, I feel like my world like expanded and exploded at the same time. And I, I think the way that I understand my, like, you know, I keep saying quotes activist work, but is one that is, I would say, symbiotically related to research. And again, I'm again trying to figure out like how to make sense of everything and how to translate and mobilize this in other ways. And again, this is where creativity comes in, right? Like, I think for me, the fun part now is like trying to figure out and experimenting, exchanging and learning. And I say this to my loved ones around like my work in that I'm less concerned with being wrong, but I care about if I harm someone or if I cause harm. And so I'm always thinking about these ways and this work while still grounding it in a Black trans feminist theoretical and praxis of love and care. So yeah, it's immensely informed by theory and praxis.
Incredible. Thank you so much. I know that this is off script, but you did mention in class before about you know, oh geez, what did you say? You said something about doing the work of dismantling the institution while being part of the institution and kind of that paradox. Do you think you could talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I can't even remember which week that was. But yeah, I think, you know, those of us who are thinking about the work that we're doing, I think in critical and ethical ways, are kind of stumped by this conundrum of like, especially in the contemporary, like neoliberal, like, you know, corporatization of the university, right? And how that's incompatible with the liberation projects that we're working on. How do we, as, you know, academics, you know, activists, whatever, artists, whoever in the space, like how do we do the work that we do while also recognizing that we also need to push for the dismantling of the university and engaging in these demolition projects while also focusing on building, right? Because building is I would say more important than demolition, right? Like we need to focus on imagining and building. And so it's just this conundrum, this paradoxical space that we're in. And again, that's what I'm grappling with. I'm like, how do I do this? How do I do this work in this space while caring for and loving the communities that I work with, that I serve, that I live in, while also protecting myself and taking care of myself? I don't know yet, and I'm trying to figure it out. But I think maybe that's just like the gist of what that conversation was.
Totally. And I think, you know, we had a class with Amar Wahab last semester, and it was a game changer for me because, you know, he really reframed the way that I approach academic work, at least. Because coming into the master's program, I was super intimidated and I felt like I had to know all of the answers. And I was like, everybody's so smart and here's little me, you know, but Amar really empowered me to lean into not knowing, and that it's okay to not know, and that we're all really here to like think through things and find answers, whatever that may look like. So yeah, it's okay not to know, and your answer was great. Dani?
Man, I'm thinking of how long I've been in school. So like 6 years on and off now. To give a bit of background, I did 2 years at Algonquin College and got an Ontario College certificate and diploma, both in Aboriginal studies. And then I went to another university, which I'm not going to name, because I dropped out in my first year there due to lack of support as an Indigenous female student. But I think that really showed me how inaccessible school can be, like academia, because I was dealing with sexual harassment from another student, and their thing was just avoid each other. And I was like, dang, like that's the environment that I'm supposed to be going to school in. And so I left and I started realizing like it was the school and it wasn't me, because I felt really crappy after. And I ended up moving back in with my parents, and it was a really tough few months there. But when I started school again during the pandemic, which was a challenge in itself, and after I got accepted to the University of Ottawa, my dad got a job there as the director of Indigenous Affairs. And so it started off kind of weird because I was like, my dad works at the student center, and like my dad knows all my friends at school. But he started showing me the work that he was doing in ensuring that this space was accessible for racialized students. And so he was talking to me about like how they want to work to get rid of some barriers. And I started talking about like my barriers as an Indigenous student, and also like as a student who has chronic illnesses and who is queer and who is neurodivergent but hasn't been assessed yet, and like how much red tape there was to get the services that I needed to excel. And I started really loving learning about Indigenous history and how like our communities were set up for everyone to thrive, essentially. And like it was around community, it wasn't around individual needs, or it was around community needs, and how we couldn't thrive as a community if we weren't thriving together, essentially. And so I started wanting to like really focus on decolonizing our understanding of Canadian history, and also started rejecting the use of the word Canada in like all my writing in school. So I use the term so-called Canada now. But I think there's been some pushback, I think, with Indigenous people going into like formal education. And I think that comes a lot from like stigma and like effects of colonization and things like that. Of like, oh, like suddenly you're too good for your community and things like that. But I think ultimately there's a lot of space to do work in academia that will better our communities, rather than take us away from them. And I think that's my ultimate goal, and like the goals of my family members and stuff. But yeah, a lot of it has been around like decolonization and learning about how to do that in a way that benefits our communities instead of just us as individuals.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Michelle, I know you kind of talked, I think you used the phrase guerrilla intellectualism. Could you talk about that a little bit and how academia has, influenced your activism?
Thank you. And thank you for the great answers to both of you. And thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your unsureties and your experiences. I know I appreciate it, and I'm sure the rest of us do too. A guerrilla intellectual. I mentioned that yesterday, actually, in Marcus's class, because it's a phrase that's always resonated with me. I was taking a class from Ola Muhammad, one of our great professors out here, and she mentioned guerrilla intellectual, and it just really resonated with me on what that could mean for the ways in which I start to, as I like to say, activate. Because as you know from our question before, activism looks very different for everybody. And if it wasn't for academia, if it wasn't for me actually taking one class in particular, Dr. Davis's Humanities 1300, I wouldn't be in this sphere at all, because like Jen said, it was learning those theories and learning about those those histories, those theories, Black feminisms, learning about all of that really kind of gave a voice to what I was experiencing, gave me a vocabulary to voice what I was experiencing. And that's what I really decided that there is something I can do, and there's something that I can ground myself in when it comes to making a difference. And guerrilla activism, which now I know is, guerrilla intellectual, which now I know was actually first stated by Walter Rodney, really is about implementing yourself within those spheres and within those structures and institutions, and using the same language, the same type of intellectualism to start dismantling these institutions. And like Jen said, I wholeheartedly believe in rebuilding as you are abolishing. I wholeheartedly believe in rebuilding at the same time as you're dismantling. And that's a lot of what I want to do with my work, particularly with my work in the city. And that's what, as a unit, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit really does. All the people on my team are very much deeply rooted in using these systems, like not necessarily using these systems, but dismantling these systems and introducing new systems. We are working to introduce new systems of even simple things like reporting, which a lot of smaller organizations don't necessarily know how to do or have access to do. We're introducing new systems of Ubuntu frameworks where it's like, we're all working together. And so that's kind of where my academia has taken me. And a lot of it did start with recognizing that I do have the privilege to be able to access academia, and I do have the privilege to be able to navigate it and do it fairly well, because I know that, like Dani said, it's very inaccessible for a lot of people. And once I recognize that it is something I have access to and it is something that I can be good at, I decided that it is a space for me to leverage. It is a space because this can be a space that I use to empower others who they themselves have access to other spaces, are stronger in other spaces. There are people who are great organizers and they leverage that skill to help their community. So I started to look at this as a tool for me to leverage to help my own community.
Absolutely. That is a great answer for sure. Where you all have such great answers that you've answered in your answers some of my other questions. But I think moving forward, Bell Hooks is someone that, you know, has impacted my work a lot. And, you know, she speaks about love, both as theory and as practice. So I was wondering, I mean, a few of you have touched on this already, but if we could dive a little bit deeper into it. I was wondering what the role of love has to do with your activism and academic work. So if we could start with Jen.
Yes. Oh, there's an echo.
That was me, sorry.
Okay. Oh gosh, felt like I was at a concert. I think love is everything. It is the guiding light, it's the source, it's the soil, it's the water, it's the, you know, it's the wind, it's everything. And I think I'm really sitting with and grappling with like what it means to love, and even be loved in these spaces, like in these academic spaces, activist spaces, etc. Like, what does it mean to be loved, right, in those spaces? And like, how do I protect myself? How do I protect my work? How do I protect the stories that I tell in my work, or that I'm a conduit for? How do I show up for myself, for others I'm in community with? These are some of the questions that love demands. And it's an ongoing interrogation and meditation. And I think particularly with academics, like if academics who are committed to making sure that education is for all, right, for example, then I think, you know, love plays a big part of that, right? It could look like, you know, supporting work outside of the space that's doing liberatory work. It could look like, you know, redistributing funds, resources, knowledge, etc. That, you know, those are practices of love and care as well. So I think love is everything. And so grateful for the offerings that Bell Hooks, our ancestor, has offered us, because they're immense. They're immense. And so, yeah, it's everything. It's everything.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that answer. Dani, I know that your work, incredible work, it really is very evident of the love, I feel. I could feel it through reading about what you were doing and as you were speaking as well. Could you talk a little bit more about the role of love?
Yeah, I think everything I do is fueled by love for my Nokomis, who I didn't get to meet. She passed away about a year before I was born. But my dad, when I was growing up, he would talk about how much I remind him of her, in both her stubbornness, but also her love for her family and the work that she wanted to do but wasn't able to. She was a survivor of the Spanish Indian residential school, which is about an hour from Sudbury, maybe a bit longer. But growing up, he just talked about like how much I looked like his mom and things like that. And when I was 11, Stephen Harper came out with the apology for residential schools. And I was kind of confused. I didn't really know what that was because my parents didn't talk about it with us. I have an older brother too. And I remember going to school the next day and my grade 5 teacher was like, "Oh, what do you think about it?" And I was like, "I don't know." Like, I'm 11, like what? And so I went home and I asked my dad what that was. And I remember we talked a little bit about it, but nothing too much. I mean, how do you talk to an 11-year-old about that? And, you know, especially when it's in your own family. And so I started learning more, gradually here and there. But I started learning more about her specifically and about the things that she went through and how, you know, her addictions were caused by residential school. And things like that. And I started learning about like his grandparents, like my dad's grandparents and my mom's side and things like that, and how both sides of my family went to Spanish. And there were so many like different emotions that came with that, but mostly mostly it was wanting to do what my grandparents couldn't, as like people who were born status Indians. Well, my grandmothers mainly. And so a big thing was that they weren't allowed to go to school. And so that's why it's so important for me to get my degree. And like why I'm putting in all the work and all the labor that is super frustrating at times. But yeah, I want her to know that her grandkids will have better opportunities than she did, and will have the ability to talk about her story and talk about like what her parents were like. And my cousin Marianne and I were starting to like look more into our genealogy and like the stories of our great grandparents and of our grandparents. And I feel like at least once a week we'll text each other and be like, did you know this about like our great grandma, or like things like that. And it's really exciting, but it's all fueled by love for my Kookums and for my community.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Michelle?
Thank you. And thank you both for that, because I guess my answer really resonates with both, because I too, like Jen, feel like love is everything. Love is the fuel that empowers you to get anything accomplished. From that book, when I saw that question, I was like, oh, okay, I just read this book because my husband actually gave me the book All About Love for Valentine's Day. And one of the lines that always resonated with me was like, domination cannot exist where a love ethic prevails. And love is the courage that it takes to stand up and to continue to get up every day and fight against adversity, whatever your adversity is, whether it's your personal adversity or whether it's for your community. And love speaks to the community care. It speaks to actively connecting and building and understanding and supporting fellow community members. Love is that work that you do. It is the choices that you make to continue to do that work. And I too I too understand, Dani, what you mean when it comes to having that love for your ancestors, because coming from South Africa, we are also, indigenous to our land, and we had our land colonized, and in a lot of very comparable ways, in terms of our histories erased and our land being still taken. So what we really do have to pray to, the love we have to lean on are our ancestors. And that's who we pray to. When we're praying for support, for guidance, it is from our ancestors. It is for those who came before us, who have suffered before us, who have lived and who have died before us, for us to be where we are. So that does really rule a lot of where my love ethic comes from. Because it's so deeply rooted in connectivity, it's so deeply rooted in collectivity, and consciously moving through this world as one, and kind of trying to find where your individuality fits within the community and the connections and even the disconnections that arise between you and the community. So that's a lot of where I guess my love comes from in my work. And a lot of it is not knowing. A lot of it is work. Love, I guess that's where it really comes down to. A lot of what I think love is, it's actively working towards a better tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michelle. So we're coming up to the hour mark. So my final question, before we open it up to the floor, was just to see if you had any advice for students who are entering this space and want to, so connect their, theory with activism practice. You know, I know it can be a very intimidating environment to navigate. So I was wondering if you had any advice. If we could start with Jen.
Yes. I think first and foremost is to take care of yourself and then others. And I think that can look different, you know, whether you're an organizer, an orator, a teacher, an artist. I think for me, that's one, care. I think also being okay with being wrong, as we've been talking about, but also understanding it's really how you recover that's important. I think what I've learned from all these years is to always be reflexive about your position and your role, you know, understanding the consequences of your work and your actions, moving with a loving and caring spirit, and always thinking about your intentions and what motivations are guiding your attraction to certain projects or spaces or people, and thinking about that all the time in a critical and ethical way. So I think that's my advice.
Great, thank you so much. Dani?
I think for me, it would definitely be to ensure that you feel safe in whatever space you're going into, and to feel okay with questioning your professors and pushing back in a way that makes sense. I know when I was at my last school, I had a prof who said something really like odd to me, and he kept bringing up the Bering Strait theory, and I said to him, I was like, that's actually like been disproven. And he's like, why are you questioning me? And I was like, why are you spreading false information? Like, and like your profs are there to help you learn. And there's no way that you're gonna fully reach your potential in that if you don't question them and make sure that you're feeling comfortable and like understanding what's being taught. So yeah, question your profs when you need to, and make sure that you're feeling comfortable in the spaces that you're in, because you deserve that as a student.
That was great. Thank you so much. Michelle?
Thank you. I guess the advice that I would have to give is there's nothing too small as long as you make a genuine attempt to make the world a better place. I want to stress to like anybody out there that your voice matters, you know, you matter, your actions matter. So if you don't know where to start, just start connecting with like-minded people, because there are so many people out there who are already doing work, already can guide you through this work, and all they need is your voice to strengthen their cause. All they need is your input to strengthen their cause. So, so find your tribe and make your mark known, because even if it may seem insignificant to you, even if it may seem small to you, somebody will benefit from the difference that you attempt to make. And it is okay to be wrong. Like Jen said, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to not know what to do at first, but as long as you're in a position where you're there to learn and you're there to recover from that, what you do matters.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I also want to just say a big thank you to all three of you. I know I learned a lot from this conversation, and I'm going to take a lot of what you said with me forever. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I know that Honor has an announcement to make. Honor, are you there? Okay. maybe she's not there. So while we wait, I was gonna ask if anybody had any questions for our panelists before we head out. Colin?
Yes, I had a question. I have 3 questions, but my first question is specifically for Dani. I was wondering, in your work, have you ever felt like you were confronted with other causes or other, activisms that were maybe incompatible or hostile to your work? Like, for example, your land back work. Did you ever feel any pushback or things didn't feel right to you, or or maybe everything has been very like everything all other causes have like been very accepting and been kind of engaged with the land back movement?
I think anything that we've come across that's been like a legitimate like activism work or things like that has been super compatible and like, yeah, worked really well. I know in Ottawa, there's been a lot of overlapping with the Black community and the Indigenous community, which has been really nice. We were working a lot with, I think it was Justice for Black Lives, Justice for Abdi. Yeah, like a lot of the organizers I know in Ottawa are from kind of different like root causes, I guess. But yeah, I find we've all been able to show up for each other where possible. So yeah, nothing conflicting other than like racists.
Yeah, I respect that. But that's really good to hear. And my second question is for all 3 of the panelists. I was wondering what has been your biggest obstacle in your work, whether it's just like we talked a bit about the pandemic and how that's been an obstacle. Has there been maybe other obstacles like within, maybe just in terms of getting yourself out there, or other conditions that may have made your work harder?
I feel like we always just wait for one of us to start. I guess one obstacle that, particularly with my work, has really been the stigma of my work, especially when it comes to advocating for sex workers, because it is incredibly stigmatized profession, and advocating for it as a, to be like sex work is real work, coming from that framework has probably been one of the biggest obstacles that I've had to face. But like I said earlier, a lot of how I overcome that is recognizing the privilege I have to be able to stand on any platform and advocate for sex work without a lot of the repercussions that many other marginalized sex workers would have. They would be shut out of academic spaces. They would be shut out of certain spaces for even saying those words. But for me to still be here and be able to do this work is really what I leverage to overcome obstacles. And really and truly, I feel like the pandemic has become an obstacle for all of us. And we have to get creative with how we navigate now. We have to navigate our communities and how we connect with our communities, because a lot of it has become really impersonal. So that's still something I'm very much grappling with, is how to get past the impersonalization of digital connection.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a hard question. I was really just sitting here being like, well, there's so many obstacles, but I think what comes to the fore is maybe the sort of like lack of transgenerational sharing that happens in terms of like all of the knowledge that our ancestors and elders hold, I think it's becoming less and less a possibility for that knowledge to be exchanged. And so I find that, particularly when working around issues of like disability justice or queer and trans like liberation, within our communities, there's just like a lot of transphobia and homophobia and ableism, and having to sometimes sit down with people and being like listening to them, and I'm like, what you're describing is like ableism, like what you're describing is like all of these things, right? And I think especially coming from like an academic space, right, I'm really mindful of language and how we use language, and how sometimes academic language is inaccessible, and like it doesn't travel in the ways that would allow for knowledge to be stretched and be understood across different groups. And so those are some of the obstacles, I think. The transgenerational knowledge, and just sort of just the tensions within academia and community around knowledge.
Yeah, I think something I've noticed a lot, and thank you both for your answers, within the Indigenous community is allowing allowing violence within our spaces, and excusing it as reactions or being caused by colonialism. And I see that with transphobia, with anti-Blackness, with misogyny, with, even like actual like physical assault. And it's like, why are we allowing this elder to come and have access to these youth when they've been spewing like really transphobic stuff on Facebook? Why are we inviting them as someone who we're supposed to be able to trust? So that's, and I'm sure that that's present in other spaces too. But that's something that I've really noticed like hard in the Indigenous community. And I don't know, it can be hard to navigate, because it's like some of these folks are supposed to be elders, but I don't know, if someone's transphobic or homophobic or something like that, then they're not an elder to me. Like just allowing unsafe people, really.
Thank you. I didn't know that. That's unfortunate. I also, just going back to what Jen said, I think what your work does, actually, speaking about, cross-generational work, like I think what you're doing is also, you're acting as future ancestors for, the future, to kind of learn from like the work you guys are doing as well. And my last question is a bit abstract. I was just wondering, what's your like activist dreams, I guess, or like what's some of your like, what's like makes you happy, thinking about, one day, something happening, and like what will that look like for you?
Go ahead, Dani. If you have a well-formed answer, maybe you've thought about this more.
A couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with one of my friends, Sam, who lives in Toronto, and we were thinking of what like an Anishinaabe self-sustaining community would look like. And at the time, Black Panther had just came out, and so we were like, what would it, like an Anishinaabe version of Wakanda look like? And I think for me, like the dream, of course, is land back, like Indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation, and like just the ability to heal from all the years of colonialism and colonization, while having the means for our communities to thrive and not just survive without capitalism.
Jen, do you want to go next? I guess I too have big dreams like Danny, huge dreams, you know. Abolish it all, down with capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, property, work, really down with all of it, down with all of it. But in terms of, you know, a more tangible, that I feel like that is a tangible dream. I feel like that it can be a dream we can realize, because when we look at history, when we look at where we are today, it was not where we were a century ago, 2 centuries ago. It, like, our society actively changes as the years go by. And even if it takes another 100, 200, 300 years to be reintroduced to a whole new system of being, I feel like it could happen. It will happen. Because we're not stagnant creatures. We keep evolving, and whether or not we evolve ourselves into the apocalypse, I don't know, but it will we will evolve into something else, or, you know, as Sylvia Winter says, into maybe like past human 2, we're going into human 3 at this point. But more short-term goal for me, especially with the work that I'm doing within the city, is to, what I really want to do is open a transitional house. I want to open a transitional house for Black, queer, and trans youth, for Black and Indigenous queer and trans youth. And I wanted to have all of the supports, all of the culturally appropriate supports, particularly, that are needed for our Black and Indigenous youth to survive and to thrive. Not to survive, like Dani said, but to thrive in this world, and to set them up right and allow them to learn from elders, because, like Jen said earlier, you know, there's that disconnect between generations. But I know a lot of it is because, especially within the queer and trans community, is that we don't necessarily have a lot of elders who have survived to be elders. So there really is that missing gap. And I'm sure that's the same for in Dani's communities as well, where it's just like we don't, especially when it comes to queer and trans voices. So I want that to be something we can start fostering, and something we can start reconnecting, as now let me say me on this panel, as I start getting a little bit older and I move out of the you know, the framing of youth, and start becoming, you know, and like now I see it as an adult, as a mentor, and one day as an elder myself.
Yes, thank you both so much for your offerings. I think, and I love this question, and I think it's a great question to end on. I think for me, it's a world where dreaming is the standard. And I think about in my own personal work, like I have, you know, visions of like having a community arts and knowledge center where it's a meeting place where we can come and share histories and make together. And there's like a community garden, and there's like there's all the good things, right? And where we can keep dreaming, and dreaming again is the standard. And that's kind of where I'm at with futures. But yeah, I think this is a really great question. Thank you, Colin.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your answers, and thank you for your question, Colin. So once again, thank you so much to our speakers. We're so happy to have you as the second iteration of the Black Table series. For anyone else that'd be interested, we're going to have another event that will be a transnational dialogue between students here in Canada and students in the Caribbean. And we're going to be talking about tourism. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, thank you again.